revolutionary. So the community's continuing and continuance, no, the beginning and the continuous was revolutionary for many reasons. The first reason, the 6 women were of different classes, and that was totally unacceptable in France in the 17th century. They were so class conscious that they would not have allowed that, and yet these women did that. They would have welcomed, and the documents welcome anyone. They probably had the bourgeois and the peasant women, but they would have, but even so, they were breaking the pattern. The second thing was they were going to live in a common house in town, not in a cloistered convent behind a wall, in the era when the Catholic Church did not accept that. And one of the ways that it happened for them was there was a hospital that they were asked to take charge of, but it wasn't a hospital like we know a hospital. It was a home for widows and orphans, really. But because they had that possible living space, then other women could move in and be with them. And so, so the different classes maybe could break down in a home like that, where it was widows and other people, orphans, other people that needed help. And the third thing was the first sisters dressed as women of the time.
And what was that?
They dressed as women of the time. The surprise to me, because I never even thought about it, but every woman wore the headpiece, the veil, the long sleeves, totally covered, long skirts. And if you've ever seen like Romeo and Juliet movies or something, I hadn't thought about that, but here's Juliet's maid running down the, with a message that she's going to pass on or something like that. She hikes up these long skirts and her veil is flying, but I hadn't thought that ordinary people lived like that. But the safe part was to wear it in black, because the ones that were most free were the widows. At the time, the only women who were able to manage their own affairs were women who had lost their husbands, that had been married once and now were widows. And so they were more independent than anyone else. So these women dressed as widows, and they were breaking the barriers right from the beginning. And we have preserved their names. Francois Hérault was 39. Claudia Chastel was a widow for 3 years. Marguerite Bourdier was 26. Anna Chalier was 46. Anna Brune and Anna May were both 15. And it's possible that they might have been orphans that lived in the house that the sisters were in charge of. And so those people made this happen. So I'm going to stop right here and say, what stands out as new enough to think, I want to remember that?
Can we start with Zoom?
Yes, please.
On Zoom, go ahead and raise your real hand or your Zoom hand if you'd like to share, or just unmute. Nothing. Okay, that's not your only chance, but how about the room?
The volcanoes are new to me.
I have a question. So when the six women, as you just described, being revolutionary, in how they were choosing to organize themselves, from the beginning, did they understand themselves? Maybe this is two questions. Did they understand themselves, A, and B, were they understood by the organized church as a religious order?
I think it's very unknown how they understood themselves. I would say the writings of Mary McGlone in her two big books are that definitely that is what they wanted. They wanted to be religious women, and yet they were not willing to be in a cloister. And so I will say a little more upcoming about what the church thought about that, or didn't even know about. Thank you.
It almost sounds kind of free flowing, what evolve on it in a normal kind of way.
That things just evolve.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just how it happened.
It happened, right? The priest, Father Jean-Pierre Médaille, was a Jesuit, and he met them in the course of his travelers as a preacher. He was a traveling preacher. The Jesuits had foreign missions, and they started home missions because it seemed like the Protestant Reformation was at that time a great challenge to the Catholics, and they thought we have to jack up our own population. They have to know more about their own faith. They don't know, and there wasn't any necessarily education for the priests. Even if a man felt like he wanted to be a priest, he would connect himself with the local priest and become a priest, and whatever that meant, there wasn't really education. And so Médaille encouraged them to form the community, and he was the one who wrote down the plan and what the structure kind of was. And the interesting thing was the Jesuits were on the move. They were a religious order that was not bound to a local parish. So that Médaille wrote that in for the women. And that was maybe the gift of who they happened to be connected with. And also so he wrote, I copied this, the original document said, they will maintain in their house a kind of cloister never open to men. And they will leave, this is surprising to me, they will leave only to go to churches, visit the sick, hospitals, prisons, and perform other exercises of charity. So what else do you do during your day except go out, but they will have this cloister except and only for, and then he lists all these things that they can go out and do. Médaille also had written phrases emphasizing God's initiative. He used phrases like, by the action of grace, or insofar as it is possible, or to be receptive to God rather than striving after it yourself. So Ignatius was the one, you brought up Ignatius. Ignatius was the one that started the Jesuits out on that track. And so Médaille was an interesting person in his own right, because very often in the 17th century, women that weren't going to get married for whatever reason were sent to the convent. Like the daughters were paid for by their fathers if it wasn't going to work, that they weren't good looking, they weren't capable, whatever. And the same was true of the sons, in the sense that the first son inherited everything. It wasn't ever divided up. And so the second sons, the third sons, what did they do? Like maybe they, became priests or something like that, because or maybe they'd get married and try to make their way. But Madai was the second son.
Oh, wow.
No, excuse me, Madai was the first son. That was what was true about him, that he chose the priesthood when he had my mistake. He had the inheritance coming to him and he didn't keep it. He joined the Jesuits. So we say the CSJ spirituality is totally pragmatic, lived out on the street. We recognize the experience of God in the perfectly ordinary lives we live. The whole thing is our mission and purpose, to be God's ecstatic love in the world and to offer a zeal that's stirring up love. So the phrasing that a lot of these different branches of CSJs have is unifying love. And so the love is to be not just that. Madai had the phrasing of like the sisters, that he called it the total double union, which I thought was way more than double. But it was like the sisters were to be love for each other and with each other. But then the sisters were to be that love with the neighbor, but they were to call the neighbor to be that for each other. So that was the unifying love that they were called to, more than just, if they were not present, they should have passed it on for other people to be doing that. And so, think about that for now. They were, and we are, in a process of evolution. Julie Harkins was one of the CSJ research people that was I think she was in the first research group that went to France. And she explained the lives of the early sisters and our life actually. And this was her phrase: they lived an uncommon, common life. They lived an uncommon, common life. And so the mission of active, inclusive love has those two separate things, which we've said, the love of God and the love of neighbor. It's two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. It's not just that we love the neighbor without distinction, but there's no distinction between love of God and love of neighbor. Jesus, of course, was the one who said, how can you say you love God whom you do not see if you do not love your neighbor whom you do see? Now let's stop a minute there and say, what information stands out? What do you want to hold on to? What will you remember?
I love that. Be God's ecstatic love in the world.
They can't
Where did
hear,
that come from?
they can't hear you.
Be God's ecstatic love in the world. Who said that?
Well, it's an expression of what they felt, and some modern person has put it into those words, but that is the driving force, that they felt that's what they were supposed to be, and that's what we continue to be called to be. That it's a lived experience.
Uncommon, common life. Oops. Uncommon, common life.
And that for sure is a Julie Harkins line. I remember that one. Uncommon, common life.
For me, it was unifying love and then passing it on to your neighbor.
And think of what that can be for the 21st century.
What's going through my mind is our Peruvian sisters always translate the dear neighbor as querido prójimo, the beloved neighbor, which says it to me, and I think that's just the most wonderful translation, which is their thing.
Anybody online?
I like, and I'm paraphrasing here, we love God in the perfectly ordinary work of our lives. I thought that was very profound.
Yeah. Thank you.
This is Peg. One thing I noticed was that always it seems through the history of the Sisters of St. Joseph, they're always doing something a little out of the ordinary in order to meet the needs of the ordinary people. So they're always willing to kind of push on the edges. And I've seen that through the history, and I still see it in the congregation in the provinces now, that willingness to push beyond the edge and do something a little out of the ordinary, to take the risk.
One thing I was thinking about that I didn't say, the sisters, even the original sisters were already living into that unifying love idea, because Medai was never missioned to the Puy. So he wrote in, I suppose, someday and gave a mission, at the parish, and they're all caught up in this. And then he comes back another time and he meets with them and hears from them. And we don't know whether they already knew each other or through Medai they met each other. We don't know that piece, but that they ended up being the set of 6 that signed the legal document of appropriation or affiliation or something like that related to the house in which they were living, but they signed it together, and those were the 6.
Can I ask a question, Kathy?
Yep.
I think I know the answer to this, but is it true that Madai, as a priest, like they wouldn't have been able to incorporate themselves with Rome if it weren't for his help, right? Like they needed a priest, they needed the man to send in the paperwork to make it official.
Well, one of the big things is there was only one of them that could read or write. So we know that at least 5 of the 6 were illiterate. So it was not uncommon that even the bourgeois women wouldn't read or write. So it didn't mean that they were all the lowest class, but it did mean that they couldn't. And so we know that we lost all those records, but there's one letter that is where the director of that house for widows and orphans is writing to the magistrate to say, the bishop probably, I need some help. And so we have her letter, and that's how we know that she could read and write. But it doesn't seem like the others did. So yes, whatever the ideas were for how this could be, Medai did all of that. He wrote. It doesn't mean that they were all his ideas, but that he could express them in legal language, church language.
Right, and be recognized by a secular church, right?
Right. So that's my next piece, Andrea. Wonderful, wonderful connection. The sisters originally experienced many lucky breaks, some might say, but we could look at the gifts of the helpful people in their lives at the moment of grace when the time is ripe. And so one of the very helpful persons, of course, was the Jesuit priest, Father Medai, who belonged to an order of men that were on the move. I said that part about Ignatius and about how, so in the 16th century, Ignatius founded the Jesuits, and so they had been living this out a while. And so they moved wherever they were needed. And one of the things that I know, Jackie, you could correct me on this if I'm wrong, that Ignatius had told the men that they were bound by the divine office. However, he said that if on a given day the demands of the people of God were such that it didn't work for you, the only thing that you would never be free from is the examen at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Absolutely.
Okay. so that already he was training the new priests and members of the Society of Jesus to adjust. You know, so that's why he wrote that in, that they should stay in the cloister except, and then he lists all the exceptions that keep you out of the house the whole day. So Father Madai wrote that idea in for the women, and we still refer to the term that he wrote in the first rule. They are all called to all of which woman is capable. That's what they should be doing. He wrote that in. Another very helpful person was the Bishop, Henri de Maupas of Lepuy, who was also at that time the civil lord of the area. He, for example, collected the taxes. So that's, you know, we have to look a little bit too at the side of the revolution that the Catholic Church was on and the problems that that created for the sisters who, even though they were connected with the people, the church was rich and had the bishops that were lords of the area and collecting the taxes and civil people also. So, but de Maupas could see that this idea of a community of active women was wonderful. Who wouldn't if you were the bishop? Helpful for the sick and needy people in his area, and they were also working for their own livelihood and not dependent on donations of the people. All of the cloistered communities, they might be having their own gardens within the wall, they might be making their own clothes, but the people in town still had to provide them with the food that they created for their own cooks and the cloth and things for what they needed. So he thought this was wonderful, that these women were working for their own livelihood and not dependent on donations. He was the one, the bishop was the one, who had the authority to decide who would be in charge of the hospital for orphans and widows. So he was the one that's assigned Francois Hérault. And then she brought the others with her, but that was an official, I don't know, he didn't apply for it, he just assigned her that position. And so those were the group of women that evolved into the Sisters of St. Joseph. And there's a quote from him soon after they were together and they were housed in this hospital for orphans and widows. He put them directly under the protection of St. Joseph and ordered that their congregation be called the Congregation of the Sisters of St. Joseph. And so the quote from him is, he had this long speech about, the whole church gathered, the whole town gathered, you know, and he was going to commission these women. He said, from this moment, we take said widows and young women under our protection, and we order our vicars and ecclesiastical judges to support them so that their admirable undertaking will always receive new impulses and so that no one comes to bother these widows and young women. So in so doing, he gave the Catholic Church's approval of this new way of life. When he accepted what Madai had written. So yes, Madai wrote it. It was what the women were doing that got written. It wasn't like he proposed something that they do. He was writing what they were doing. And now the bishop was saying, hey, this is a good thing, you know? And so he also accepted them. And so it was those two pieces. The third piece was the nation itself. France itself was also helpful to the new community in that the country at this time was resistant to Rome and was not wanting to receive orders from afar. Because the country was so mountainous, it was difficult for any message to get through, even from Paris. So if the ruler in Paris wanted the hinterlands to do thus and so, they could say, oh, we never got that message. You know, well, for sure, the same is true with Rome. They never even requested that Rome approve of this. It was just, the bishop did it, they accepted it. The Roman Catholic Church was now the beneficiary of a new group of religious women. So, what stands out? What did you notice? What do you want to remember? They didn't require maintenance. They were free labor.
I think one thing for me that stands out, because I'm a widow, I really appreciate that the widows were part and accepted. And now that's only growing with the possibility of consociates. So it's a good time for widows here.
They made it up as they went along,
Yeah,
the women.
yeah, they just evolved.
That's the deal. That's something to really cling to.
And not only that, they didn't wait for permission.
Right.
They did the thing that needed to happen and then found people who could help them move through the barriers that were their reality to sort of get sanctioned after the fact. And I have heard that there's not the direct sort of accountability to Rome that other orders might have, but I never understood why. And I'm guessing that's part of what you were gesturing
I think that's a little correction, Finn, is that we don't have the same direct relationship to the local bishop
Oh, okay.
we do to Rome. I mean, and that's a gift, that we've seen it as a gift.
Sure.
Most of the time.
Louise, go ahead.
Yeah, I just really love the fact about the message never got to Rome, or the Rome didn't get its message to this community. So they kind of got to do what they needed to do without having to have following the rules so much as perhaps other communities did. So that idea of communication was to their benefit, or lack thereof.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
It's interesting if you think for a minute, how could that be possible today? You know, there wouldn't be that same kind of freedom.
Right.
This brings to mind the apostolic visitation and the way we handled, we had to handle the apostolic visitation, being examined by Rome, and our leaders who were in the direct conversations had to find a way through conversation to move past an impasse. So I think there's a way in which we've always struggled with Rome, with the institution and the institutionalizing of religious life that has been a part of the church's history, the larger church's history. And we've been on the edge of that, trying forever to kind of hold on to the spirit in us, the love in us, and the relations with the neighbors as well as with God in the process.
I'd have to go back in church history, but it seems to me that the church was not as centralized in that time, in the 1600s. So there really wouldn't have been, and it seems like because of the geography, because of the transportation issues, because of a number of different reasons, the bishops had more self-authority.
Yes.
And that's why the MOPA would feel comfortable affirming what's happening in his own diocese. So the church, as the church changed, there was no such thing as canon law in that time.
Right.
And so consequently, there weren't any regulations that talked about groups of monastic and apostolic women religious. And there is so much I'd like to say about the apostolic visitation that it really would be a topic for another night. But what I know for sure in my heart of hearts is that what we really try to do is maintain our integrity by showing in a non-violent way. And there was, I can't tell you what loomed up in most of our hearts and souls when we heard about the fact that our lives of service to the church were going to be investigated.
Remember?
It was awful. And beyond the scope, again, of what Cathy is doing with us tonight. But we tried to maintain our own integrity and our own independence and our own voice, especially by reacting publicly in a way that would affirm our charism rather than become violent protesters. We had no need to protest. We had a need to stand up for who we were and are.
That was a hard time.
And you brought up, Jean, the centralization idea also, and that was true of the religious houses too. Actually, each house was independent. Okay, coming right back to it. Each house was independent, and so later on there was a movement to try and hold people or help people by being together.
Cathy, Finn didn't know the years of the apostolic visitation.
Or no,
So,
just, I'm
just kind of
what is it?
what
I don't
is
know
it?
what you're
Yeah,
talking about.
kind of, yeah. Don't know what we're talking about.
Was it 2000?
I know about this because I was in province leadership and I had the designated title of province director at that time. So all the communication came to me. And there is a book. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Pardon me?
However long the night.
No, I'll think of it in just a minute, but I wrote the chapter in that book that tells the story of how it started. And it actually started with a conference that was in Stonehill, I think it was Massachusetts, where a very conservative cardinal came and heard some of the American conservative cardinals say, naughty, naughty, these women have too much freedom. In other words, we were living according to Vatican II. And some people didn't, some church authority didn't like it. There ought to be an investigation. So the actual communications started coming to us in 2009, 10. And there was a whole process in there. And then there was a visiting of a certain select number of religious communities in the United States. It was only women religious in the United States. And guess what? The St. Paul province was chosen to be one of the sites of the visitation. So I could go on and on about the stories because some of them are really humorous and some of them are really sad. And the support that women religious throughout the United States and the respect that we gain for one another is still part of our very bones and blood.
And from the general public.
Yes, Linda.
Yeah, thank you. I also just want to say that in the readings that I've done myself of the documents that Madai wrote, associates and agrégés are mentioned by name many times, which is relevant for candidacy.
Right.
Yeah,
The power of sisterhood is the name of the book.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Thank you, Jean. right, yeah,
I remember
I
that.
missed that, Andrea, in the beginning times because it was gonna be after the French Revolution, but it isn't after the French Revolution. We've always had associates in agrégé right from the beginning. And so all the way through from those first 2 centuries that we kind of lost a lot of the documentation for. But then under the leadership, so the French Revolution happened and every community lost everything. They lost their structures, they lost their right to exist as a community. They were just dispensed with, and they had to fend for themselves. And so the Sisters of St. Joseph that had spread all over France by that time, fell into the same thing and returned home or just became independent single women or something like that. But we trace our heritage through Jean Fontbonne. And she had been a sister that we know as Mother St. John. And she had organized all kinds of wonderful things in the area where she was working. And one of them was a workshop for the women of the time to come together. And again, they bridged all of the levels of class society. And that time they actually did have rich women coming to the workshop space under the same roof. And some women were making handmade things or cooking things or doing things that would be helpful to their family for that night. Other people were making things like that they would give away if they were the rich women. But all of that, went by the boards when the community was disbanded. And so there was a certain number of years, I'm just rushing this a little, but again, I think when Robespierre fell, Mother St. John and her sisters were in prison. And they were in prison for hiding priests. Because at that time, the priests had to sign an oath to the state that it wasn't, the Catholic Church or anything that they were beholden to. And the priests that did sign that were considered apostates by the sisters, and they wouldn't go to mass, that those priests were, and the other priests were either gone or in hiding. So they were trying to help their parishioners underground. And so the women, before it all broke wide open, one of the stories is that the sisters refused to go to mass to this priest that had signed the oath. And so the neighbors, this huge band of ruffians banging their drums and came to the house where they were living and literally dragged them to church and had set up kneelers in the front for them, so that people could see that they were there. And they just stood there. They wouldn't kneel, they wouldn't sit, they didn't do anything. But they announced loud and clear that we are not part of this, we do not agree with this priest. And so there were stories like that mostly Jean and her sisters were really leading the neighbors into being stronger. But anyway, they ended up in prison for hiding priests, and they were apparently scheduled for the guillotine. And the night before, it came right down to that, Robespierre was killed or died or whatever happened, he's dead. And so the whole thing, everything that the reign of terror, that in Le Puy, there's a picture of a tree that's still in the square where the guillotine had stood. And we have records of 5 sisters that lost their lives. But again, I'm saying the church could be seen to be on the wrong side of this confrontation. So whether the sisters couldn't be seen by the revolutionaries, they were church women. So So that kind of thing happened. But the thing about the credit of who sent missionaries to the United States, before it was to North America, is given to Mother St. John Fontbonne. It was never her idea, and she didn't even want to do it. It was the Countess de la Jacqueline, who wasn't even an associate necessarily, but she was a partner in mission and always supporting, friend of Mother St. John, doing everything that this Mother St. John wanted done. And she was reading the Mission magazine, and Bishop Rosati in St. Louis was desperately begging for priests in the magazine, and he was interviewed. And so she's reading all of these magazines and nothing is happening. She writes to Bishop Rosati herself and says, "You need the Sisters of St. Joseph. They are the ones that could get something done." And so she doesn't get an answer. So she does it again. She writes to him again, "Did you get any priests yet?" "Well, I've got the answer for you. You need the Sisters of St. Joseph." But then when he decides, he asks then for them. Then she goes to Mother St. John, who is a little reluctant. Like, there's all of France that's asking for sisters to come. So why should we send them across the ocean, you know? But this Countess, Felicity, was just passionate about missionary work. And so she actually talked Mother St. John into it. And not only that, she funded it. She sold her jewelry to get the sisters to the New World. And so they came, you know, up to Mississippi. I don't know, it was about 3 months, I think, trip. And so all of that, but the women that and men that have always been part of how the sisters managed were sometimes formally recognized, sometimes not. So we don't have time for do we could run a few pictures through, maybe?
Yeah.
Sure. This is Le Puy itself. Wow. Do you see the puys, the needles standing up? And the highest one in the back is Our Lady of France. And the closest one is this Chapel of St. Michael. And the one with Joseph isn't in the picture here. This is the cathedral. And the cathedral is so exciting to me in the modern day, because it is not only was it the place that the sisters always found as home, and it's the same, it's a million steps getting up there. And then when you get inside what looks like the door, you go to the right and you go up more steps to the side. And the exciting thing is when you're in the worship space, that is where the Camino de Santiago begins. Every morning, it's one of the starting places. And the most exciting thing is that what you don't see happening, so there's the pilgrims going out, but the main aisle literally opens up and exposes the steps, so that the steps that nobody else can go up, the pilgrims can go down on the way out, walking through France and then Spain on the way to the burial ground of St. James. The names of the first 6 women are in the archives. This is the kitchen where everything happened. It was probably the eating place, the gathering place, the prayer place, and assumably the beginnings of the sharing of the heart time. Jean-Pierre Médailles on the left. Look at the bishop in his lace. They could really make the difference between bread on the table or not if women learned to make lace. And so that's what the women, the sisters taught women so that they had a profession. And because everybody was wearing lace, men and women. And here's one woman, present tense, making bobbin lace, throwing those individual bobbins back and forth and making the patterns. Okay, Mary, you could pass that around. This is the handmade lace that's being passed around. This is one of the streets in Le Puy, and the little house or the little shop on the corner is the lace shop for Martine, the woman that you saw the picture of. The streets in the old city are all volcanic stones. So the pattern is the black stone is the volcanic stones from ancient times. And then they add the more recent local white stones to create that beautiful pattern. The Black Madonna is featured, the one on the left is in the center of the cathedral upstairs. The copy of the original older Madonna is on the right, and she has her own little altar space.
And she's smiling.
And they take the Madonna, this is all the centuries, take the Madonna out yearly for this healing pilgrimage. It's everyone, and on the right, you see the center of the cathedral, and the Black Madonna is on that white pillar in the center, where you might usually look for a crucifix. And on the left is the healing stone from pre-Christian times that is still right in the side altar. And people come, lie down on it, put their hands on it, beg for healing in the cathedral. And out the back door of the cathedral on the left, you can see walking up to Our Lady of France. And the picture on the right is standing inside the cathedral looking down the steps. Our Lady of France on the left, the figure that's on the right of that is a statue. The person that's on the left that's looking through I was gonna say magnifying glass, the opposite. Telescope. Looking through the telescope is more the size. You can go up inside the statue like a mini Statue of Liberty. And I walked up, and there's lookout places as you're going up. You can get all the way up to her crown of stars. And that picture on the right is from inside the statue looking out.
Oh my.
And so again, the city on the left and on the right. This is in the square where the guillotine had stood. This is the Tree of Martyrs.
Tree of what?
Martyrs. That's what religious people refer to it. Everybody else would just say it's the center of the square. Mother St. John's picture, she wouldn't sit for it, but somebody was able to kind of put it together within her movement. She didn't think it was appropriate to have her painting done. And this is the cathedral in Lyon. And it's that tall spire to the right is actually a separate chapel. And that's where Mother St. John would go every day after she sent the missionaries to North America. That's where she prayed, not the big chapel. And this is in the archives. They've reconstructed her office, or her room, not her office, her bedroom, her communications. And that's her burial site, Mother St. John. And there's the Joseph, the last statue that's on one of the puys we didn't see in the big picture. So I think that's it, right? Oh, yeah. Let's do it.
You must give yourself to love. If love is what you're after, open up your hearts to tears and laughter and give yourself to love. Give yourself to love.
Thank you all.
Oh my goodness, thank you.
Kathy, I just wanted to share just something quick here. Not that I was distracted, but I've got a task to do. Is this on? I've got a task to do is collect and decide on the 45 photos that will be a part of Sister Pat Pfeiffer's memorial video that Lori True will put together. So I've got to scan some photos and so I've got this big box and I don't know and I didn't know her very well. But as I was looking through them just now as you were presenting, I came across this postcard sent from Le Puy. And it says, "This is one of the high points of our trip. We are living in the first convent of our sisters after they began in 1650. Le Puy is high up in the mountains, and the steep, narrow cobblestone streets and roads are reminiscent of the Middle Ages. We stood in the square of the martyrs where our first two sisters were guillotined during the French Revolution. Tomorrow we start for Lourdes. You are in our prayers. Love, Caroline and Monica, please say for us." And here's a photo of you with her. Anyways, I just thought it fit together.
Wow.
Not, I don't know how.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
Thank
Turn off the
you.
Zoom.
She's quite the artist.